Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? Matt here from YoVideogames, and I'm back again with a kind of a real talk video that I've kind of been wanting to do for a little while, and it's sort of been gnawing at me as, you know, the days have gone by since stuff came out. And what really kicked this off was really the Famitsu data that came out from Japan this month recently about the console launch sales for the PlayStation 5 and, you know, subsequently the Xbox Series X as well. But let's just get right into it. So just boiling it all down, the PlayStation 5 and the Series X, they did okay. Personally, I actually kind of look at the launch numbers for the sales, even in Japan, and just go, this is not great. But let's just boil it down. So within the first 4 days of its release in Japan, the PlayStation 5 sold 118,000 units, and the Xbox Series X sold within 6 days, I want to say about 21,000 units. So those are the numbers. Now, obviously, PlayStation 5 was always going to do better than the Xbox Series X in Japan. That's not really what I'm talking about. But more what I want to get to is that the best-selling game on the PlayStation 5 was Miles Morales at a whopping 18,640 copies sold. And the second place, like literally right behind it, at 18,607 copies, was Demon's Souls. So those are your two best-selling games on the system, and you know they're about a tenth of the total number of units, which also begs the question of like, what are people doing with their PlayStation 5s in Japan if not even 20,000 copies of a single game can be sold? So. Very odd, but the thing is, the PlayStation 5 does have a lot of backwards compatibility features, and I don't know if they have the PlayStation Plus library of games that we have in North America, which is actually really cool. It's actually totally worth it, too, if you buy the system and you're like, I don't really have any more money for the games. Well, if you have a subscription to PlayStation Network, holy crap, you got an access to a lot of really, really good and long and big PlayStation 4 games, you know, just totally at your disposal. And same thing with the Series X, where you have Game Pass, and you have access to hundreds of games right at your fingertips for a very, very, very low entry fee. So what this means is, because, you know, I understand, obviously, like, people hear those numbers and like, is that good? Is that bad? You know, Japan is you know, it's an island nation. It's not exactly huge. It's not like, we're not talking about India or China or even North America with as far as like just general population. So how does that stack up? Well, if we look back in time, going by launch weekend numbers from other Sony products, the PlayStation 2 launched 631,000 within its launch, and that's so 118 for the PS5. PS2 at once upon a time had 631. In fact, other than the PlayStation 3, which is a very odd, if I think back to that time, there were a lot of weird shortages with the system, and it was very, very expensive. They only sold 88,000 units at launch of the PlayStation 3 in Japan. But other than that, the PlayStation 5 is the lowest console launch in this century for Sony. Because we just go back, the PSP had 166 at launch, but it went on and became a huge hit in Japan. The PlayStation Vita sold 325,000 on its launch weekend. PS4 sold 322. So going from that, you know, you had the Vita 325, PS4 322, PS5 is sold 118 out the gate. Not great. And in fact, to give you an idea of how not great this PlayStation 5 launch is, the PlayStation 5 in its first 4 days sold less than the original giant fat Xbox did in Japan on its launch, which sold 124,000 units. Now, the Xbox actually got way worse and worse over the years, like half, like every time, like 360, 62,000, half of what the original did, and then 24,000 for the Xbox One, and 21 now for the Series X. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's done a lot worse for Microsoft, which never got a foothold in Japan. But these numbers are not great. Now, here's the thing. There is the argument to be made that, well, tightly allocated might be a PlayStation 3-like situation where, hey, they sold out, you know, of their PlayStation 5s. Every PlayStation 5 they released in Japan, they sold out of. So it's like the demand is there, they just don't have the raw units. Which, you know, that's a fair assessment, but it also kind of also talks to something Bloomberg's actually talked about recently, and that is Sony's really shifted their priorities away from Japan. They've also and shifted their focus away, and that even goes as far as a developer level, where like, you know, the PlayStation headquarters are now in North America, and there's been talk from Bloomberg that they've slowly kind of just been like either letting go or people have just been quitting from Sony Japan studios just because there just isn't that much stuff being greenlit from them, and that's a real shame because, you know, they did the Astrobot games, you know, the VR game, which was very well received, Astro's Playroom, which is the free pack-in game for the PlayStation 5, and it is, you know, everyone knows it's fantastic. It is a great little game, but yeah, it also is kind of like, well, they aren't making, you know, massive, you know, I hate, you know, using the term everyone hates, AAA video games for Sony. They're not making Last of Us 2s, they're not making Ghost of Tsushimas, they're not making Days Gones, they're not making God of Wars, you know, they're not making Horizons, you know, the list goes on and on. So yeah, it definitely seems like over the years that the Japan studios, you know, they had a little niche carved out for themselves with like the PSP and especially the Vita, but like those systems dried up and died, and frankly, like, you know, for better or worse, Gravity Rush 2 just got buried in its release, which was, I think, early 2017, which, yeah, good luck getting noticed in that year of just knockout titles. And it wasn't even really a bad game either, but it has its fan base. But yeah, like, we'd be lying to ourselves if we said that Sony Japan Studios was, we'd be lying if we said they were keeping up with Sony Santa Monica, you know, or Naughty Dog, or even Sucker Punch or anything like that. They're just not. They're not. Or Insomniac, you know, for God's sake, which Sony recently acquired. So, yeah, it seems to sort of be pointing toward this general trend where, like, Sony themselves doesn't have a lot of faith in Japan, which may be why they just didn't ship a lot of PS5s over there. So, you know, you could say, like, okay, well, there is demand, there just isn't supply there. But here's the other problem. And here's something that maybe a lot of people may or may not realize, is that in Japan, the Nintendo Switch, despite coming out years after the PlayStation 4, has sold more consoles than the PlayStation 4 in Japan. And that is nowhere near true on a global scale. You know, globally, the Switch has about 40 million units to catch up on if it wants to try to catch up to the PlayStation 4 on a global scale. So, you know, when you look at it that way, Switch is doing great, sure, but it's not doing nearly as well as, say, the PlayStation 5, which again had a you know, many years head start on the Nintendo Switch. So we'll see what happens when it catches up in years. But yeah, in Japan it's a very different story where Switch is doing much better, and a lot of people already kind of know this, and that's Japan is kind of a mobile-centric country. They value their mobile games a lot. There's a lot of public transit in the major metropolitan areas such as Tokyo, and then I imagine Osaka, and in possibly Kyoto. I don't know, I've only ever been to Tokyo, so I can only really speak for Tokyo, which is the largest city and is a giant sprawling metropolis that has an amazing public transport system of trains and buses, you know, to say nothing of even the taxis, which, you know, even using that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, people don't. There's not a lot of reason to own a car or drive there. So a lot of people are taking public transit a lot in Japan. And yeah, if you have a Switch or a cell phone, you're going to be spending a lot of time on that. I saw middle-aged businesswomen playing PUBG on a train when I was in Japan. So it's like, yeah, people game of all ages over there, but just not at home, not on a console. And it's been slipping really hard pretty much since the end of the PS2. Like, the HD era was the brick wall for Japan, and a lot of the developers had a lot of struggles, both switching over to HD development and the rising costs associated with that. And, you know, like, it was already, you're already kind of starting to see Western game companies start to chip in, you know, at the market share during the PS2 era, because the PS2 era was when video games really started to explode. Like, there were explosions of popularity where it's like the Nintendo Entertainment System, it brought video games back from the dead, and it made it like a huge toy commodity, basically. And then the 90s kind of continued it, but if anything, it sort of just spread out the audience a bit because you had competitors now like Sega Genesis and a million other flops like CDI, 3DO, Jaguar, what have you. But then PlayStation 1 came along, and then that, because of it sort of standardized pricing and sort of made things a little bit cheaper on average than what games used to cost, PlayStation exploded pretty well. But the DVD multimedia functionality of the PS2, that's when video games skyrocketed, just completely skyrocketed into mainstream. And they've just gotten more and more and more mainstream as time has gone on. And, unfortunately, it seemed for the country that sort of brought video games back from the brink and sort of, made a lot of, the all-time classics, they were starting to slip away with the HD era. Just, you could see it across almost every single major franchise brand. Like, some people did better than others, but it was definitely starting to slip away already in the HD era. And I don't know what it is, because I don't live there and I'm not a cultural expert, but for whatever reason, people were more willing, it seems, and more people were willing to do it in Japan to video game at home during the 16-bit and the 32-bit era, and even going into the PS2 era. But sometime around the early 2000s, whether it be the advent of smartphones, which could just be it, just having a good enough phone device was all Japan really needed to leave their homes. Whatever it was, whatever contributing factors or number of factors, Japan just kind of started to slip away from having a huge market share or part of video game sales. Part of that's also just because the global population is so much bigger, and when you have places like India, China, America, Europe all together, and even South America, when they all start collectively as a mainstream major crowd start playing video games rather than just the smaller niche crowd of both kids who like video games and just like enthusiasts, when you get beyond that and then you start getting into mainstream in these much more highly populated countries, all of a sudden, naturally, of course, Japan can't keep up with those numbers. But on the other hand, even within their own country, they're just not playing console gaming the way they used to be playing console gaming. Now this video is not about why. Okay, like I'm kind of just speculating and killing time here, but I think there's a lot of decent reasons for Japan losing sort of the grip on console market share. And my question, what this video is meant to do is not to sit there and say like how do we fix that, because here's the thing. I don't know that there is any fixing the console market problem in Japan. And I don't think it should even be a focus, honestly. It boils down to me as like, so what does Japan do if they don't have a home console market that's really worth pouring money and effort into? What do they do, to compete on the global scale? And my answer is very simple. Just keep doing what they've always done. Just stop thinking about the home market. Now, this might seem kind of like, oh, that's just a simple, like, short, kind of like, you're not really putting a lot of thought into it. But hear me out here. When Japan tries to make a game that appeals to Western audiences, it almost always kind of blows up in their faces. You've had Namco try a number of times, with some first-person action games, some of them that don't even come out. Hello, Frame City Killer, and Break. I think it was Breakdown and stuff like that. And then you've had the Sega even tried with Binary Domain, which a lot of people actually say is really good, but it obviously never really found an audience. But here's the thing, I think, is that the people who live around the world, they actually love Japanese-style games. And that, I'm of course speaking about myself and a lot of the other people, pretty much everyone, YoVideogames and all of our community, we love Japanese style video games. Love them. But the thing is we're not really enamored with mobile devices. Like, it's just not a thing in our part of the world. And if you look at software sales globally for anything, a Switch is doing very well, but Switch mainly sells Nintendo games, like third-party games. Unless they're cheap in indies or something, they don't really do well. Like major physical retail copy video games for the Switch, they're not hitting like the crazy numbers that Nintendo's own first-party titles are, and that's fair. That's kind of been the way it's always been with Nintendo portables. But there is something to be said too about the fact that it's like we do like we obviously like deals and whatever, but we like playing games at home. We like our home consoles. We spend good money on big expensive TVs, giant ones, and stuff like that. So it for us, for the greater majority of the global market, and particularly the Western market, which is obviously what I can speak to the most authority on, is that we actually really enjoy our home console experience. We love our God of Wars, we love our Ghost of Tsushimas, we love our Spider-Mans, Horizons. Yes, even many of us love our Last of Us. Like you stick your head in the sand all you want about it, but it sold a ton of copies, and a lot of people do like it. But we like our big experiences. We love our big gaming experiences here. And the thing is, we love big gaming experiences no matter where they come from, be it Santa Monica, be it the UK, be it Japan. And I still think there's a decent market. In fact, there's a growing market, I would even argue. And I'll use a couple of examples here. The Persona series is seeing more sales than they've ever seen before in the series' life. And that's because of the gaining popularity the series has had, which only grew with each, numbered sequel for starting with Persona 3. Fire Emblem is follow the same trend where, people got aware of it because of Smash Brothers, and then it exploded because of Awakening on the DS, because now you can marry all your little waifus in the game. And, Fire Emblem, the Three Houses, sold 3 million copies on the Switch, which that would have been absolutely unheard of back during the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance era. Like, nowhere in a million years would Nintendo have ever suspected would have gotten those sales. And even, again, my own beloved Monolith Soft games, they're now crossing the 2 million mark. And breaking down the sales from Nintendo's own financial reports, 80% of Xenoblade sales come from overseas. And only about 20%, 20, maybe 25% of the sales for Xenoblade actually come from Japan. And this kind of all wraps down to my main point here, is that Japan should just keep on doing what it's always done, which is make great, fantastic video games out of our great experiences, whether it be at home or on the go. But keep making those games. We don't want to see an end to games like Resident Evil or Devil May Cry. We wish game series like Metal Gear Solid and Silent Hill didn't have to end, but fuck Konami. And Namco still makes games people love playing. People love, Dragon Ball FighterZ. They love, Dragon Ball Kakarot. They love the Tales of games still. They do well, and they do well primarily out. They make most of their sales outside of Japan, and I think it's a tough thing to maybe grasp, especially if you live in a country where like your main market isn't even a place where they speak the same language as you. But here's the thing, though. I think you can still be successful. You can still thrive in today's climate. If you're Japan, just don't worry about the home market. And one of the ways you do this is, first of all, you need to stop with this delayed release. If you're a very small company, or if you're an independent game developer, totally understandable. I'm not speaking to them. I'm speaking to these big boys. I'm speaking, there's the Namcos, the Capcoms, the Sega, and Nintendos, and frankly, they've all got it pretty down, pretty well. Like they almost nobody has any problems releasing games simultaneously anymore. And that's really the key here too, is that like when you have games like Pokemon, Zelda, Xenoblade, they are releasing day and date as the Japanese versions. That's what you need. That's what you want. There is one lone exception to this, and that's fucking Sega. Now, here's the thing. I don't want to throw shade at them for being like, I would never want to say lazy or slow or whatever, because if you look at the Yakuza games, they are absolutely phenomenal translations and localizations. Not just translations specifically, they are localizations, and they are fantastic. Whether they include voice acting or not. And Zero really helped explode the popularity. And the thing is, Yakuza games from Zero and Kiwami 1 and 2 and Yakuza 6 and 7 now, they are not games designed in any way, shape, or form for America first. They're not. But you know what? People love them, and they're discovering them, and they're loving them more and more and more for a very, very simple reason. People like Japanese-style games. Now, that's a bit of a tough cookie to crack, or crumble, if you will. Or tough nut to crack, tough cookie to crumble when it comes to localizing simultaneous launches on Yakuza. However, I feel if Sega really wanted to, they should really, for Yakuza 8 or whatever their next Yakuza project is, they really need to bring that localization team in from the early development stages and try as hard as they can to make a simultaneous release, because having this almost near year-long delay between the Japanese and Western release of Yakuza 7 doesn't really help anybody. It doesn't really help the sales of a PlayStation 4 game in Japan, because again, the PlayStation 4 is not even doing that great. It's going to do much better overall with its lifetime sales once it gets out here in the West on everything else, including the PlayStation 5, which has to wait until next spring. And then the other big elephant in the room is fucking Atlas. And Atlas, again, growing in popularity. People love their games not because they play anything like a Western RPG, but because they're so uniquely stylized as a Japanese role-playing game experience, and people love that. But they need to dig their heads that are so far up their asses that they're fucking, like, you know, scanning their lower intestines, pull it out and realize that they are missing a huge opportunity to have much bigger, better sales if they would just release this shit simultaneously. And I don't think there's any argument can be made that, like, well, they have to finish the game first before they... No, that's bullshit, because Atlas is part of Sega. Sega is a global company. They make money, although not as much as they probably wish they were. And frankly, other companies have been doing it. If Pokemon, Zelda, Xenoblade, even Fire Emblem, shit like... If that shit can get translated, localized, and released simultaneously day one, Sega can fucking figure it out. It's not like they have a shit ton of projects, you know, that they're spread so thin anymore. I mean, they have their fucking Yakuza games, and then you have your Persona games. They don't even release that often. Like, there's still no release date, to my knowledge, of a Western release for Persona 5 Scramble, which is mind-blowingly just baffling to me, because Persona 5 has done so well. It's been so well received. It's sold so well, including Persona 5 Royal, but they have this sort of quasi-sequel Musuo tie-in game, and it's not fucking released in the West. In fact, I don't even know if it has a release date. Age of Calamity had a simultaneous release, to my knowledge, and it sold 3 million copies in a few days. 3 million fucking copies. And it's just a quasi-pseudo prequel to Breath of the Wild, and it's a Musou game at heart, and it sells 3 million copies. Granted, Breath of the Wild has sold 21 million copies, so I'm not saying Persona 5 Scramble is going to sell 3 million copies in a weekend. It's just not. But holy fuck, Atlas is missing out on a ton of fucking sales, and having these delayed launches, they only hurt the sales in the end, because what you do is you get a lot of people who will import the game, and then they'll stream it, they'll YouTube it, and they try to be all draconian and like completely bafflingly stupid as hell about people streaming and recording the gameplay, but it's going to fucking happen anyways, and it is going to get shared, and all these spoilers they don't want people to know about, because they want them to wait a whole fucking year in the West before they can even have the attempt to play through their own video game. They're going to get spoiled anyways, and a lot of people are going to lose interest. They'll see whatever it is they needed to see and be like, you know what, I don't need to spend the $60 on that title anymore. And guess what? You fucking played yourself, you know, by having this, well, we'll release it in Japan, and then we'll think about what we're going to do about an American release. So, you know, I'm not speaking at all to any quality of Atlas titles, but let's be real with ourselves here. They are missing a huge opportunity for a lot of really big early sales by not having these simultaneous releases. And really, they're one of the last people I can think of who actually have this problem. I think there's still some Koei Tecmo titles that have staggered releases where, you know, they're in Japan for a while before they come out to America. I don't know what the deal is with, like, say, Atelier Ryza 2. I don't think it's a huge delay between them. I don't know. I haven't really been keeping up, but I know there are titles sometimes that do that. And again, I go back and I want to make sure I understand certain titles by like Marvelous or Xseed. They have to come out in Japan first because there is literally nobody within their company ranks that can localize a game while it's being developed. They don't have the resources or the manpower to do that because they're much smaller companies. I get it. That's totally fine. That totally makes sense. But when you're Nintendo, Namco, Capcom, Squaresoft, which, they're all doing great on it too. Like I years ago, I actually have videos, you can find them on YouTube, about me bitching about why Nintendo isn't releasing their games simultaneously. And kind of a year or two after I bitched about it, they started doing everything simultaneous release, and lo and behold, the Switch is now one of the best-selling consoles in Nintendo's history. Amazing what'll happen when you just have the content people want and at the exact same time everywhere, so people can just get it and buy it. There's a whole another video to be made about FOMO, which is fear of missing out. And when people fear that they are missing out on a project, and then they hear about it and they see the spoilers or whatever, and then like months and months go by, and it's like, oh, by the way, here's the American release. You gonna buy it? No, I've already moved on from it. Whether it be mentally or just you've imported it or you've watched it on YouTube. So, yeah, I think the future of Japan is a little shaky. It's a little scary, but I think if they can really quickly come to the same conclusion here, is that like, don't stop making Japanese games, because we love Japanese games. People love Persona games. We love Yakuza games. We love Capcom games and Nintendo games. I love my Xenoblades and what have you, and my Niers. But they got to be good. I don't. They can't just be fan servicey. They got to be good too, and that's a huge difference for me. That's a whole nother video. But I think all Japan really needs to do is just keep making the games that you want to make, and the games we love to see, and we'll keep buying them, but don't gate them behind a release window where like Japan gets it super early first, and then we gotta wait months to a year to get our own version of it, because we will lose interest, or we will small number of people will import it, we will watch them play through it, and then we will be done with that whole project. So yeah, I hope they can this maybe gets through to them. Like, really, the only one left at this point is Sega and maybe Koei Tecmo. They're the only like two major publishers that really kind of need to learn this fucking lesson, and then it probably needs to be someone really needs to beat this into their head somewhere. And I have almost no doubt that the people who work for Sega of America or Atlas America, whatever, and even whoever works on the American side of Koei Tecmo, I have no doubt they're probably all sitting there like, well, we would love to. We've been trying to tell them this forever, but it hasn't gotten through. Like, I'm sure they would love to do this. I'm sure they would love to be involved from the get-go, but for whatever corporate company politics reasons that they still aren't able to localize a game until it's been done. You know what? They need to get over that, because time and time again, it has been proven that when a company starts, doing these day one releases around the world, the franchises just get better and better sales. It's happened with Pokemon, it's happened with Fire Emblem, it's happened with Xenoblade. It's going to keep happening. No matter what it is, it will keep happening, because there's no reason not to be a global company. Because if you're going to release games around the world and say you're a global company and all your press releases and all your spreadsheets and all that other bullshit, then act like one. Don't act like, well, we release this product in a country that doesn't really care about the home console market all that much anymore, and then we kind of hope someone will translate it on the cheap, and then we'll release it like a few months to a year later, hoping maybe it'll find some word of mouth and get picked up around the world. That's dumb. That is an ancient, decades-old way of thinking, and it doesn't work in today's hyper-connected world. And you know what? It needs to die. It needed to die 20 years ago. But yeah, anyways, that is how I propose Japan stays in the game, by just being themselves, but making sure, if you've got the backing of a major publisher, make sure you've got that game coming out same time everywhere else. So again, to wrap it all up, I love Japanese games. I think a lot of people love Japanese games, and all Japan really needs to do, just keep making Japanese games, but don't worry about the home console or the home market in Japan itself. They're kind of a lost cause as far as I'm concerned. Maybe they'll come around. Maybe there'll be some resurgence in the home console market there, but regardless, there's just too many people that live around the world that love what they do, love what they create, and love their uniqueness, that you don't need to worry about selling, am I going to get to 1 million, or would I get really successful and get 3 million or 4 million in Japan? How about, you worry about, just worry about like the hundreds of millions of people around the world that love your product. Make sure it's getting into their hands. Make sure they're aware of it. That's the future of Japan in the video game industry. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you on the channel. Later, dudes.